All right, I think this is working. I just recorded like 20 minutes of me talking to my screen, but it didn't record. So I'm hoping this one records. I want to elaborate on my little video from this morning. So I did a live stream. Sorry, it did get cut off at the end. I didn't say anything important. The gist of it was already done. But I wanted to record this one to make sure it works okay. And I did it kind of rushed this morning because I was in the middle of trying to make lasagna, which is much more important than the antics of Russia and the new Rasputin, apparently. But anyway, I do want to follow up because this is important, and I don't feel that the church really understands exactly what is going on in the world. And by the looks of the preaching going on at Mass, people are totally oblivious to what is actually happening. They don't know we're at war, quite physically. Or spiritually, and it's maddening to me. But maybe that's in God's providence. Maybe if He told people what was actually going on, it would make them scared to be Catholic. I don't know, but it's for Him to wake people up. I'm done trying. But for the people that do know what's going on, I want to clarify, and I want to use the words of Dugan. And so just keep in mind a couple things when I go through this article. Keep in mind, keep in the forefront of your mind the seers from the 1800s. I'm thinking of Jeheni, I'm thinking of Emmerich, and I'm thinking of Elena and Taji specifically. When they talk about Europe being invaded by a Red Army, and they talk about state sanctioned churches that resemble Islam and have all these other, they're ecumenical and all these other weird things, I want you to keep this in mind because this is the other face of Freemasonry. This is the other face of the flip side of the New World Order. So I'm titling this video Eurasianism, I guess is what it's called, versus Atlanticism. And that's really what it is. So he sums it up perfectly what I've been trying to say. And so this has been in the works for a long time. And I also want you to keep in the forefront of your mind, does this lunatic seem like the type of guy that would off his own daughter to further the agenda of the mother country? I think you're going to see yes, he is. So this is all the way back in the 80s, 88, March 88, translated from Polish. This was an interview done with him. So this plan has been in the works on both sides from a very long time. But the thing that we have to keep in mind as Roman Catholics is that these two competing world powers, not only do they fight with each other, but they have this problem of the Catholic Church, okay? The Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, stands in the way of both of them being able to achieve what they want to achieve. And so even if they're fighting with each other, they also have a common enemy, which is yours truly, us, okay? And again, by the looks of the church, we're in trouble, y'all. And if there wasn't divine help, we would be toast. Really, we would be. We would be a thing of the past, wiped clean off the face of the earth because man, oh man. All right, so let's get to this. This is long. This is going to take me a little while to go through. Maybe I'll skip over some parts that aren't that pertinent, but he says, I am waiting for Ivan the Terrible. Ivan the Terrible killed his own son, by the way, so there's that. So students of the Diplomatic Academy in Moscow, whom I talked to, told me that the reading they were given, and this is the interviewer and everything in gray is Dugan. Told me that your book, Fundamentals of Geopolitics, which is required reading for Russian military, was the most remembered chapter devoted to sacred geography. In Poland, I have not met anyone who could deal on this issue. Could you please tell us what place Poland occupies in sacred geography? So, what is sacred geography and how does it fit into the Russian battle plan? So, Dugin, whether he's directly advising Putin or not isn't the issue. People like to argue over that. That's not the issue. The issue is Putin is taking his writings as his playbook to dominate the world by what they call Eurasia. So they think because Russia is in the middle of Europe and Asia that they are in a sacred spot to be able to control the world, okay? So that's what this whole thing is about. They don't want Ukraine to exist, they don't want Poland to exist, and they want to team up with Germany in order to have this power block to be able to control the world because they are in the middle of it all. But in order to do that, they have to bring down the American empire, okay? So he says this about Poland. I have never dealt specifically with the case of Poland, although its place is very specific. After all, this is the north of Eurasia, an important region of the pre-Christian Slavic region, the Baltic Sea Basin. Regarding the archetypes of sacred geography, I would like to point out two things. First of all, in the Russian Orthodox reality, there is a synergy between the pre-Christian and Christian world models. What does that mean? Paganism. Okay, pre-Christian, that's another word for pagans. So there's a synergy between pagans and Christian in the Orthodox reality, which overlap without conflicts. Different figures and phenomena from different orders overlap painlessly and even harmoniously. In the case of Poland, there is a much more conflicting relationship between these two models, and this is due to Catholicism, which is a tradition completely different from that of Orthodoxy. Renee clearly separates tradition from religion. Tradition is a broader concept than religion. Orthodoxy is a tradition. Catholicism is a religion. Tradition is able to absorb elements of other religious beliefs without conflict. So that's the heresy of syncretism. And what does that sound like to y'all? To me, that sounds like I'm spiritual but not religious. That's what that sounds like to me. Now, I'm not saying every Orthodox person believes this. Every Russian Orthodox person believes this, because I'm sure many of them don't. But this is the mindset behind the politics in Russia, is what we need to understand. On top of that, who's to tell them that they can't believe that, since they don't have a pope? They have no authority. So they can believe this and still be considered Orthodox, whereas Roman Catholicism, we have an authority to tell us you're out of line. They don't have that. Okay. Religion, on the other hand, comes into conflict with other beliefs. It is related to a different historical experience of the Eastern and Western churches after the Great Schism. For the West, it was not only always purely religious, Catholic. There was a period when it was more traditional, Orthodox. After the Great Schism, however, Catholicism departed. No. This is where everybody gets it wrong. We didn't depart from anything. Everybody else departed from us, okay? So it's one of those instances where you have to watch the wording of things. Catholicism departed from tradition and narrowed down to religion. This is at least our Byzantine version. How does this relate to sacred geography? Well, in our understanding, the West understood as a territory where Catholicism and Protestantism dominate. It is an opposite relationship to religious norms and elements. Of course, there are many elements of other religions in the West, but they conflict with the Catholic religion. Institutions that deal with sacred geography or remnants of pre-Christian traditions in the West after the Great Schism were relegated to autonomous spheres, to magic, esotericism, hermetic orders. In Orthodoxy, such a split did not take place. Very important to understand. In this context, Poland is on the border between the Catholic and Orthodox worlds. And mind you, he's very influenced by Aleister Crowley, who's British, by the way, and who was a 33rd degree Freemason, okay? And he was in his own secret societies, the Russian version of the Masons, basically. From my Eurasian point of view, the archetype of Poland's sacred geography is deeply dualistic. On the one hand, a pre-Christian, pagan, magical, heterodox tradition whose roots remain Slavic. On the other, German Roman Catholicism. There is a conflict between them. The situation of Poland is a borderline one. She cannot unite with the Eastern world religiously and with the Western world ethnically. In geopolitics, Poland remains part of the sanitary cordon separating the Eurasian continent into two parts, which is very convenient for the Anglo-Saxon anti-traditional forces. Poland cannot fully realize its Eurasian Slavic essence because it is hindered by Catholicism, nor by its Western European identity because of its own Slavic character, i.e. language and customs, archetypes, climate of places, etc. Poland is always falling victim to the third force, as is today's mondialism and Atlanticism. Due to this location on the border between Russia and Germany, the problem of partitions of Poland between the East and the West will always occur in history. It is the result of this sacral geographic and geopolitical duality. Okay, are there any elements in the Polish tradition that you find attractive? He says, I am definitely closer to the Slavic Eurasian sources of Polishness, their ethnic and even pagan elements. I am attracted to certain Eastern or Oriental elements, the culture of minorities. I think the best thing in Polish history is the Jewish tradition in small towns in Eastern Poland. Actually, I am interested in everything that was anti-Catholic in Poland. Polish Freemasons and occultists, Jan Potocki and Hohen Ronsky and Mizensky and Dzerzhinsky. They all chose the Eurasian path. And so just so you understand what the Eurasian path is, like I said, it's this core block right in the middle of Asia and Europe that rules the world, lords over Europe specifically, and gets rid of Christendom, any trace of Christendom. And they believe that it will only come through destruction. So they understand that the world's going to have to be blown up. And then out of the fire, like the phoenix, Eurasia will arise and rule over nations, and there will be an era of peace, really, is what they believe. It's wild, okay? But it's going to be this utopia of, all these religions assimilated into this state-run orthodoxy religion. It's not going to work. It's going to fail. But they don't obviously know that because they don't know Mary and they don't know Jesus. Okay. You are talking about Poland's position between the East and the West, that is, between Russia and Germany. Meanwhile, many scholars emphasize the greater similarity of Germany and especially Prussia. Now, Prussia is very important because we know that the Soviet Union modeled their version of communism really after Prussia's version of communism, and that Jesus pointed it out to Anne Catherine Emmerich, pointed to Prussia and said this is where the enemy comes from. He says, our job is to unite with Germany and create a powerful continental bloc. The interviewer says, what about Poland? It says, we, the Russians and Germans, understand in terms of expansion that we will never reason otherwise. We are not simply interested in preserving our own state or nation. We are interested in absorbing, through our pressure, which means force and violence, the maximum number of categories that complement us. We are not interested in colonizing like the English, but in drawing our strategic geopolitical boundaries without even special Russification, although there should be some Russification. Russia in its geopolitical and sacral geographic development is not interested in the existence of an independent Polish state in any form. It is also not interested in the existence of Ukraine. Not because we don't like Poles or Ukrainians, but because these are the laws of sacred geography and geopolitics. Poland has to choose either Slavic or Catholic identity. Okay, he goes on to ramble. In a word, from your point of view, all anti-Catholic activities in Poland are beneficial. He says, exactly. You have to break Catholicism from the inside. Strengthen Polish Freemasonry, support decaying secular movements, promote heterodox and anti-papal Christianity. What does that mean? Anything but Roman Catholicism Christianity. Catholicism cannot be absorbed into our tradition unless it is deeply reoriented in a nationalist and anti-papal direction. So be very wary of the people who want to bash the Pope all the time. Because whose hands are they playing into? The hands of our enemies. That's who. I don't care. I'm telling you. Let me continue. If there was a lodge in Poland, a lodge, what does that mean? Freemasonry. Like the Irish Golden Dawn, whose leaders such as William Butler Yeats or Maud Gonye on the one hand were Catholics and on the other fanatical occultists inspired by Celtic culture, then one can have some hope. Such people could decompose Catholicism from within and reorient it towards a more heterodox, even esoteric. Anyway, my friends in Poland tell me that there are groups with you related to Telmanism or the achievements of Aleister Crowley. And the interviewer says, frankly speaking, the opinion is more widespread in Poland that if there are forces decomposing Catholicism, they are closer to the West than the East. And this is a lie. And this is what he says. As I said, you find yourself between two clashing blocks, two civilization concepts, Eurasianism and Atlanticism, which wants to create a new world order, i.e. a civilization devoid of tradition, sacrum, and metaphysics. Okay, and so now here you see the difference. The two versions of communism. One is more rationalistic, scientific. The other one is more metaphysical and esoteric. The Russian one is more metaphysical, more Eastern mysticism, that sort of thing. More of the New Agey stuff. But it's all, I mean, it really is on both sides anyway, but that's just the two faces of it generally. And he says, if this is how the New World Order is presented in Poland, it is almost always added that only Catholicism can be a salvation from total secularization. And he says Catholicism cannot be a guarantee of defense against the New World Order because it is a transition stage to this order. I do not believe in such an evolution and such a mutation of Catholicism that it could acquire a Eurasian character. What can we hide a lot? I am not like Zuga now, who promises every lame orphan on the road something pleasant. Poland is in a tragic geopolitical situation. Both they, i.e., the New World Order, Atlanticism, and we, Eurasians, want to deprive you of your Catholicism. Ding, ding, ding. Alarm bells. There you go. That's the plan all over, not just Poland. It's happening in Ukraine, happening all over. Our offer is better, however, because with us, you will at least be able to develop and realize your Slavic identity. So the less influential the pro-Eastern forces in the anti-Catholic lobby, the more tragic your situation becomes. I do hope, however, that you will have forces leaning towards Eurasianism. Maybe there will be some synthesis between the extreme right and the extreme left. It is a pity that communism in Poland has never been esoteric as in Russia. And that's where you see they learned from the atheistic communism that failed. They learned that all that did was create a void, and it didn't work. And so the new communism in Russia is exactly what he's saying. It has an esoteric flair to it. But again, it's anything but Roman Catholicism. That's the goal. So if that means the occult and shamanism and the New Age and all this stuff, then that's what that means, and they're fine with that. Before the war, let's not get into that. Okay, then the interviewer says, what you say reminds me of what I had recently read about Russian Christianity. Some of the historians of religion believe that Russia was never thoroughly Christianized, that Christianity was adopted very superficially, and pagan beliefs and customs were still alive among the majority of the common people. And listen to what he says. It all depends on what we call Christianity. Orthodoxy and Christianity are two different things. When you say Christianity, you mean Catholicism or something analogous to Catholicism. Meanwhile, Orthodoxy is defined as non-Catholicism. So if Catholicism is Christianity, then Orthodoxy is non-Christian. Or what? Anti-Christian. Conversely, if we are Christians, you are not. I am relying not only on the claims of our fathers after the Great Schism, but also on the 8th and 9th century authorities such as Photius. Orthodoxy, which is not a religion but a tradition, is much closer to what we call paganism. It embraces and includes paganism. The teaching of the Cappadocian or Palamite fathers does not completely conflict with pagan norms, but only transforms pre-Christian archetypes into Orthodox contexts. Orthodoxy is more than a religion, both vertically because it includes paganism and horizontally because it is open to metaphysics, which has completely disappeared in post-school Catholicism. Orthodoxy and Catholicism are two completely separate phenomena. Tradition and religion are like a whole and a part. Therefore, it is not possible to unite Orthodoxy and Catholicism. Then they point out that there's dogmatic differences between Catholicism and Protestantism, but they're closer in culture. But there's minimal dogmatic differences between Orthodoxy and Catholicism, but the cultural differences are vast. But what you're going to see is how this gives way to communism. I'm going to show you right here. So Werner Sombarth, developing the thesis of Max Weber, stated that not only Protestantism but also Catholicism was the source of capitalism. Catholicism, with its philoke and the idea of individual salvation. The idea of individual salvation is not a Christian thought, but a typically Catholic one. There is no concept in Orthodoxy. There is no concept of a unit at all. In Orthodox anthropology, the word individual does not appear. As we know, anthropology is the basis for the construction of the entire social system, the entire civilization model. Sombarth believed that Catholic anthropology assumed a specific development of socio-economic relations because it attached great importance to the concept of individuality. Orthodox anthropology, in return, always emphasized the supra-individual personality. Man then sees himself as part of a larger whole. Therefore, he does not save himself, but someone saves through him. In Catholicism, a man is an individual and therefore an indivisible whole. In Orthodoxy, a man is a dividum, an individual, and therefore divisible. In Catholicism, man is a finite being. He is responsible for himself, to God, to people, etc. Protestantism has made this conviction even more holistic. In Orthodoxy, a person is part of the church, a part of the community organism, just like a leg. So, how can a person be responsible for himself? Can the leg be responsible for itself? This is where the idea of the state, the total state, comes from. Therefore, the Russians, because they are Orthodox, can be true fascists, unlike artificial Italian fascists like Gentile or the Hegelians there. The real Hegelianism is Ivan Pereswatow, the man who invented the operacina for Ivan the Terrible in the 16th century. It was the real founder of Russian fascism. He formulated the thesis that the state is everything and the individual is nothing. The state is salvation. The state is the church. It is enough to read the writings of our Orthodox saint Joseph of Wallacamlas to see that these two organisms are identical. Identical. And now this whole organism for salvation, all strive for salvation without crumbling like one collective soul, one collective body. He says, the most important thing is that we have no individuality. The individual dissolves into the collective. This is how the Russians work for salvation. Whose salvation? The salvation of the archetype, the salvation of Adam. Through the state, the Russians are striving to save not themselves, but Adam. This is a holistic approach in Orthodoxy. It is about the salvation of the Old Testament Adam through the coming of the new Adam, i.e. Christ nature. Not Christ nature. While nature is saved through people, the state, especially the Holy State, is the instrument of this salvation. This is why the Russian Tsar is an active participant in the mystery of soteriology. After the fall of Byzantine, he became the last guardian of the catacomb, a tradition, ready? And now you see where France comes in. A tradition which Charlemagne turned out to be usurper at the turn of the 8th and 9th centuries. It was the Byzantine emperor who was the true emperor of both East and West. He says again, it was a usurpation. The imperial function of the West, whether under the Stauffenbergs or the Habsburgs, was always questionable, because the ecumen can only have one emperor. One of them must be false. According to all the norms of orthodoxy, such a sacred anointed figure, regardless of any negative personal character traits, was the Byzantine emperor, and after the fall of Constantinople, the Russian Tsar. It can be said that all Western philosophy and culture arose from rejecting and ignoring the Byzantine tradition. In the West, the Orthodox version of Christianity or metaphysics is not taken into account at all. It is treated as if it did not exist. The point is, if Catholicism is right, then neither Russia nor Serbia have any reason to exist. Culture should be Americanized and Protestant because this is the right direction of development. I don't agree with that at all. I don't think he understands. I don't think he understands Protestantism, really. I don't. It's very, it's strange. So after all, Protestantism is a child of Catholicism. Disgusting, I admit, and obnoxious, but legitimate. So if orthodoxy is wrong, then one should choose the Protestant way, and as is the Church of England, vote that there is no hell. The right, however, is on the side of orthodoxy, which remains the most perfect form of traditionalism, sacredness, and conservatism. In the beginning there was East and West. East is paradise, fullness. West is exile, nothingness. Eastern Empire, legitimate. Western, apostatic. Apostatize, basically, is saying. These aren't just archetypes. There's a great struggle going on between Byzantium and Rome, Russia and the West, Eurasianism and Atlanticism, socialism and capitalism, barbarism and civilization. This is what he says. We do not represent civilization, but culture. We all, Russians, Serbs, Tatars, etc., represent the barbarian element. Barbarism is life. It is the sacred world of tradition. We live in shacks, beat drums, drink vodka, and we were attacked by Daniel Bell, postmodernism, post-Protestant information society, the New World Order. In this great clash of Atlantic civilization and Eurasian culture, All that lies between us, Poland, Ukraine, Central Europe, and who knows, maybe even Germany, must disappear and be absorbed. Huntington is right. A clash of civilizations is imminent. There is no room for the countries in the middle. I've already talked about Poland and Germany. What can Germany do? After all, this is an occupied country. The Germans missed their chance during the war. We had to fight with us against England, turn the pack to the west, and then Hitler, Stalin forever. Today, instead of English, Russian and German would be spoken everywhere. The Germans did not go for it and lost. Now there is an American occupation and such murder that even your mouth cannot be opened. However, I do hope that Germany will shake off this state of affairs and shed its dependency sooner or later. I'm convinced that in the common Eurasian home, there will be room for Germans, Poles, French, and Italians. We, the Russians, will impose only a barbaric, sacred attitude to life on Eurasia, and how it will be manifested in a particular nation will depend on their own national predispositions. I see Poles, for example, as defenders of Slavic racism. The Slavic element always breaks down the frames of individualism and strives for community. Okay. So even here in the premises of the National Bolshevik Party, it is enough to look around to see that they all look the same in their black uniforms. They even have a similar facial expression, only the Lord is definitively different from them. I am just like them, he says. I don't think about myself, I think about others. I don't think for myself, I think for others. There are two concepts, personalism and individualism. Individualism is the opposite of community because the center of the world, a constitutive element of the worldview, becomes the human individual. There is no place for community or holism there. There is only a rational, logical, relative agreement between individuals. What in turn do we propose? We are not against the person, but for understanding them supra-individually. This is, in a sense, the Nietzschean idea. Man is a dynamic phenomenon, constantly overcoming himself. This overcoming means human growth, growth beyond the limits of his individuality. In the vertical dimension, a person then becomes part of a community, an organ of a certain organism. On the other hand, in the horizontal dimension, someone has to think. Together you cannot think, you can act together. If you mix them all together, then the head of this collective organism will arise the sum of the individual brains, but one brain, the most enlightened one. There must be a certain hierarchy. Okay. The goal of Russian expansion is total soteriological science. We have felt it for centuries, since the time of the metropolitan iron of Kiev, but it is now more obvious than ever that we are not a nation among many, but that we have a mission to reveal a truth to the world. We want a different end to history than the one proposed by the West. We want a sacred end, not a profane end. We are convinced, and we live it, that we have a certain key to spiritual and eschatological truth. Every Russian knows it. What is the essence of this truth? Our whole 1,000-year history is an attempt to reveal this truth, to look for forms of its expression. It is the truth that the West has plunged into its depths. It is the truth about salvation, the transformation of the world, a new pleroma, a new quality of being, resurrection from the dead, the transformation of bodies, the sunlight that should come from the lips of the Great Mother. I don't know what that means. Mother Earth? Mother Russia? We Russians, due to our ethnic and religious predispositions, are called to do so. Our whole history, including the last battle of communism against capitalism, are only different attempts to realize the same messianic dream. To tell the truth, it is somehow difficult for me to imagine communism as a fight for the sacred in the world, especially in the times of Stalin, so praised by Lord Stalin. It was a deeply anti-orthodox movement. Churches were demolished and closed. Bishops were tortured and murdered. The faithful were imprisoned and sent to Siberia. Forced atheization was carried out. He says, first of all, it was the orthodoxy that Stalin was destroying. That was very incidental, imbued with the spirit of the West, alienated from the nation. Second, the messianic dream I mentioned could live outside orthodoxy and develop in other forms. Communism was an attempt to liberate this messianism from a purely religious understanding. Perhaps this attempt failed precisely because it was so distant from theology. So I think that in the next expansion, we should use all our experiences, both purely sacred and socialist. Socialism is nothing more than a secularized version of Byzantinism. It is a red Byzantium. Orthodoxy is a sectarian exalted form. It can be said that the people's monarch, Stalin, with the popular faith that is communism, stood against the alienated, lordly, noble, Occidental monarchy in the Orthodox Church. I'm not such an ardent supporter of the Stalinist system, but I can clearly see the pulsation of the historical existence in communism as well. So if I say my unconditional yes to Bolshevism, Lenin, and Stalin, it is not because it was an ideal system, but because it was the only solution for us. This time we have not succeeded yet. But the next time we will purify orthodoxy and communism, and we will discard those elements that cause these models to alienate themselves from the nation. Our next stage will be orthodox communism, Eurasian, missionary, pan-Slavic, Philotar. It almost sounds like a postmodern project. We include a lot but also exclude a lot. We exclude individualism, the individual, the free market worldview, neutrality, tolerance, and we include barbaric, fanatic, and exalted elements. This is not postmodernism, but let's say postmodern. Postmodern is the object state in which we live after the victory of the West over us. Moderna is over. Postmodernism is just one answer to the postmodern challenge, the liberal answer. There must also be an anti-liberal response. That is ours. Postmodern, anti-postmodernism. The reflection of the West breaks down everything into prime factors while at the same time sterilizing and drying up everything like exhibits in a flower bed. Our reflection does not deprive us of the aroma of life, even erotic delight with our ideas. It makes us drunk. We are drunk with Eurasia. Okay, the West treats Russia very severely. He brings up Deacon Andrei Kurev admits that you are a heretic. He calls somebody from the Orthodox Russian Church calls Dugin a heretic, and this is what he says. One deacon sentence against the other sentence. Fortunately, we do not have Catholicism, where there is the office of the Pope and everyone must obey him. I too can safely say that Deacon Kurev is not fully Orthodox. At the moment, there are two orthodoxy. The first living full of spirit, and the second official, formalized, and staff. Deacon Kurev represents the formal, pro-systematic, I would say even profane branch of orthodoxy. He writes texts that are spiritually Catholic. For example, he believes that the merit of Christianity was an impulse to the development of exact sciences, which caused the desacralization of the cosmos. The Haitians would have hailed him as a heretic at once. Fortunately, orthodoxy is much wider than the church itself and also includes a branch of the old believers. I belong to the Moscow Patriarch myself, but I am in spirit with the old believers. Besides, they consider themselves the only true Orthodox. If there is ever a real revival of orthodoxy, it will come not from the ossified structures of the official church, but from the depths of the Russian national spirit. And he's basically saying they don't have an authority because they don't have a pope, so anybody can be a heretic. Okay. Oh, they get into television, right? So I see that you have a very closed thought system, but what are the chances that the ideas you are preaching will find resonance in society? Observing the Lord, you say, some haunted idealist is sitting in the basement, something is raving under his breath, but his fantasies have absolutely no effect on people, on another frustration in our century. Okay. I am an active in the National Bolshevik Party. He admits it. It's not a big party, but it has a clear focus. We especially try to influence young people, especially students, who will be the elites of the young generation in the future. We are, after all, the only party that deals with the thoughts of young people. We teach them to think and live. We are concerned with the indoctrination of the next generation. This is not done by anyone in Russia, neither liberals or communists. And he says television does it. And he says that's right. But she forms average and passive people. We, on the other hand, shape people, as Gumalev called them, passionate above average, those whom Pareto called counter-relatives of the future. Other national parties, such as the Barkishists, do not form a counterpass but defensive troops. Their militant organizations are not elites of any kind. We, on the other hand, focus on those who will set the tone for life in Russia in the future. We prepare them conceptually. Remember, y'all, this was in '88. He's talking about the Bolshevik National Party. We organize seminars for them, publish magazines and books. It can be said that our party is purely intellectual. All these pickets or demonstrations are only an addition to the basic task, which is the intellectual preparation of a generation. We already have hundreds of people formed this way across the country. Okay. He talks about the influence. So our past was Desmond diverged because his traditionalism and Eurasianism is Muslim and mine Russian. Returning, however, to the previous set, it does not matter. I'm waiting for my Ivan the Terrible. All politicians who will be looking for a real and great idea for Russia will come to me sooner or later. Not because I am a great individual and I personally came up with something myself, but because there is an objective idea of Russia and I'm only its exponent. My latest book, Fundamentals of Geopolitics, is read by all opposition politicians and the more serious officials of the Yeltsin administration. The idea of the Moscow-Berlin-Paris axis, which Yeltsin spoke about recently, is directly taken from my writings. If Tokyo is added to that as a classic element of the Eurasian geopolitical concept. In addition, many circles in other former Soviet republics are interested in our ideas of a conservative revolution. For example, in Armenia, the group of Robert Kartrin, who came to power at the moment, the so-called party of the war, people largely shaped in our writings. It is often said about your environments, and this is the last part and we'll wrap it up. It is often said about your environment that you are the Russian counterpart of the Western European New Right. What is that? The New World Order. This orientation, assuming that the battle for the fate of mankind would take place not in the political but in the cultural fields, proclaimed a kind of culture camp. Culture camp of the New Right is a wonderful idea. Alain de Benoist is a heroic activist and brilliant thinker, but their fight for 30 years has brought no results. They said that the battlefield will be culture, while the Americanization made its greatest triumphs in culture. Right-wing Gramscism is a deplorable state. It has never gone beyond the margins. How to explain this? I think that the conceptual model of the New Right is very interesting, but the temperament of its European activists is insufficient to implement such ideas. They are too civilized, too conservative, too cowardly, such warm dumplings. So I do not like comparing with them, because it is basically comparing with losers. Over the years of the opposition in Russia, I have done such things that they never dreamed of. I was not concerned with the culture comp, but with the ideological fertilization of serious political forces. I have worked with living history, not archaeology. The only man in the West whose breadth of views shocked me was Jean Therart, the author of The Idea of Euro-Soviet Empire. Before his death, he even came to Moscow. I hosted him here. I introduced him to Jegor Zanganau and Barbin. So Europe today has a choice. Ready? This is what it all comes down to. Europe today has a choice, Eurasianism or Atlanticism. Either he goes with Russia or with America. If the European New Right chooses us, that is, it chooses the barbarian element and therefore must adopt our methods of operation. You have to organize attacks, deal with sabotage, set fire to and blow up bridges. True anti-mondialism is destruction and terror. What is the New Right doing? She turned into an intellectual sect. Overweight and gray men have been gathering at seminars for 30 years and beating foam. Of course you have to read books, but that is not enough. You have to create a guerrilla. You are against the New World Order. Then take a knife, put on a mask, go out in the evening and kill at least one Yankee. That is why I am so close to the New Left, the Right Brigades, and the Rote Army Fraktion. Our task is not limited to culture. Our task is to make a real revolution. For this, we need ideology and intellectual preparation, but without concrete participation in the action, without frontline experience, without combat baptism, it will remain unattainable for us. I do not know if any of the new right activists have ever been under artillery fire, but our people not only attend meetings or fight barricades, but also go to real wars, e.g., Transnistria or Yugoslavia. The new right is just a project, and we are designers and executors, architects, and builders. Our future is. So there you have it. That's the plan, Stan. Okay? So we have to wake up and realize that we have no friends and we have to stick together and pray the rosary. Because without divine assistance, we are toast. Have a great Sunday. Joan of Arc Media out.